I wanted to say first of all thanks to the Stoics of San Diego for welcoming us to your beautiful city, to this great state. Tomasz, Amiel and I went to, we had to go surfing yesterday down the Pacific beach. And while we were there on this beautiful day with this, great waves, about the right size, like quite little waves, and Tomasz said this is an easy place to be a Stoic. And that's right, because you really feel in harmony with nature here, at least until you like fall off the board and wipe out. But it's a great place to have this first conference, because California has a special place on the map of modern Stoicism. It's where A.A. Long lives and works up in Berkeley. It's where Viktor Frankl set up his Institute of Logotherapy. It's where James Stockdale, I think, is buried up north of, just north of here. Stockdale, who used Stoicism in that prisoner of war camp for 7 years. And I guess in some ways he's kind of like the first saint of modern Stoicism, Stockdale. It's where Michael has set up the Stoic group, which is a great kind of step forward. The second state of what is it? And it's where Eric's been working on promoting Stoicism for, I guess...
14 years.
14 years, exactly. And, let's all just say a big thank you to Eric and Amiel for opening their doors to us and having us here. They both had me to stay here last year as well, when I invited myself in January. And Eric's been a pioneer of online Stoicism for over a decade. And he's also a pioneer of offline Stoicism. This is what we are. This is reality Stoicism, when we're actually meeting up and meeting each other. So Eric, has played a very important role in like modern Stoicism. He set up the Stoic Registry, which is now called New Stoa. He also set up the Stoic Yahoo group. Some of you might not be aware of that. He doesn't run it anymore, but it's still going. He set up the Stoic College and also the Stoic Council. And it was in a meeting of the Stoic Council, I think it was about 6 months ago, that I had this, this crazy idea of having an international gathering of the Stoics.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, it'd be the first one for thousands of years. And Eric was like very, appreciative. He was like, yeah, okay, Jules, that's a cool idea. And I was like, yeah, and we can have it on Marcus Aurelius' birthday. Wouldn't that be great? And he was like, yeah, okay, Jules. And I was like, and we can have it at your place. It's a typical British manoeuvre to invite you into other people's countries. But I've been a business journalist for 10 years, to my surprise. And in all that time, I've been sent off to these conferences. And the conferences will be on things like structured finance and tax optimization and the German mortgage bond market. And I'd be sitting at the back, bored out of my skull, and I'd be kind of daydreaming. And I'd daydream about, a conference that I'd go to one day where I actually cared about what people were talking about. Where I was actually involved in what people were saying, where I was really interested. And 10 years later, I'm really glad to be finally at that kind of conference. So what am I talking about today? Well, what I want to talk about is the interface between Stoicism and psychotherapy and politics. Now that might seem strange to you, this idea of Stoicism and politics, because Stoicism was always quite an individualistic, even quite an anarchist kind of philosophy. It was about what individuals can do when societies fail, when institutions fail. It was born out of the breakdown of the polis. But what's happening today in modern Stoicism is that there is this kind of interface between Stoicism and politics. So people are deciding what's not just good for the individual, but what's good for the city. And that raises kind of ethical questions, which I want to look at. And particularly questions about whether we should be seeking or promoting the pursuit of virtue or the pursuit of happiness. Now, for me, modern Stoicism really began in the 1950s with this guy called Albert Ellis. Have most of you heard of Albert Ellis? Some of you haven't heard of him? So Albert Ellis was a psychologist working in New York in the 1950s. Can you write his name? Yeah, Albert, and then Ellis is E-L-L-I-S. He founded cognitive therapy. He unfortunately died in July 2007, about 2 weeks after I interviewed him. I don't think the two were connected. I think just he was a 92. He was an old guy. But now, when he started looking at Stoicism, this was in the 1950s, and at that time Stoicism wasn't really taken seriously in academia. It was seen as kind of a historical curiosity, something that people did for a few hundred years in the past, and that was it. It was kind of in a dusty old cabinet saying 300 to 500 AD or something like that. But what was happening was it was being reevaluated by self-help authors, by kind of popular psychology and self-help authors. So, I mean, for example, Dale Carnegie, who wrote this big successful book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, came out in 1932. And he, in this book, discovers Marcus Aurelius, and he says that he seizes on this phrase of Marcus Aurelius's, life itself is but what you deem it. And he said these were 8 words that can transform your life. And the Stoic idea that our thoughts make our world, and we can change our reality by changing our thoughts, this has been hugely influential in self-help and in popular psychology. So way before Stoicism was kind of reinvented by academic philosophy or by psychology, it was rediscovered by people like Carnegie, these kind of street-level gurus, and we have them to thank in some ways for the revival of modern Stoicism. So now, when Ellis started working in psychology in the 1950s, there were 2 schools of thought that were really dominating psychology, psychoanalysis and behaviourism. Now, both of these schools of thought emphasize the idea that humans are not really in control of themselves. We're not really in control of our thoughts. We're either at the mercy of external circumstances, which is what behaviourism thinks, or of the unconscious or the id, which is what psychoanalysis thinks. Now, Ellis trained as a clinical psychologist in the 40s, which meant training in psychoanalysis. So he got a job at Rutgers, he got a job at New Jersey Hospital, and he started climbing up the ladder of psychoanalysis. But, I mean, quite quickly he became frustrated at the lack of results he was seeing. He'd be seeing patients, every day, sometimes every day, or once a week for years, and they weren't really making any progress. And he felt that psychoanalysis was too passive. He was just sitting there, listening to them complain about their childhood for years and years. And he said he thought neurosis was just a high-class word for whining. So he was an autodidact. I mean, this was a guy who grew up, during the Depression. He wasn't an intellectual. I mean, he wasn't, from academia. For a while, he'd been a traveling pants salesman. I mean, he was, he wanted to be a writer, then he became a sex guru. He wrote a book called The Art of Erotic Seduction. He wasn't an establishment guy at all. But he was an autodidact, so he set about looking for alternatives to psychoanalysis. He didn't have this great respect for the guru Sigmund Freud that a lot of smarter people did, So he went and read widely, looking for other ideas that would work. And he read not just psychology, but also philosophy. He never made a distinction between psychology and philosophy. He was just looking for things that would work to transform people's lives. So he read a lot of ancient philosophy as well, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, and he read the Stoics. And in all that reading, one phrase stood out to him and flicked a switch in his brain. And it was the famous phrase of Epictetus's, that it's not events, but our opinions about them that cause us suffering. And that phrase really caused a revolution in modern psychology. It led to something called the cognitive revolution.